Let's talk a little bit about our own neighborhood and have an actual conversation which allows us to carry on life as usual.
Life as usual
As far
with
as business in the
neighborhood,
neighborhood
or
is concerned, I'm talking about our neighborhood.
do you
Like,
have a country to the north and a country to the west in mind as well? Or
absolutely. Can we sit with China or Pakistan and have a conversation
sure,
to resolve
sure.
what seem like intractable issues right now?
There will be consequences both across the LOC and across the IB if something like this happens. That is really the message of Uri and Balakot. No, the ball is in their court. Would you do business with somebody who's just barged onto your drawing room and is, trying to make a mess of your house fencing? You won't. Business in this country has not ignored China. In fact, business is buying from China. I mean, if I come to you today and say, don't buy China, buy everything in India, you'll say that, well, I can't buy. There are no vendors. Many countries today, we have to put a national security filter. China is concerned. We will still encourage people in this country, manufacture in India, source in India, procure from India.
Minister, in your very wide-ranging address, you covered many things. One, you specifically mentioned about the role of government and diplomacy in economics and business, since this is a business summit. Let's talk a little bit about our own neighborhood. You did talk about China right now. We still have a 100 billion deficit with China. But as a region, we are the lowest traded region in the world today. Do you see a possibility in the next 5 years or 10 years that we can figure out a way to sit across a table and have an actual conversation which allows us to carry on life as usual? Because today it's not, certainly isn't. In the neighborhood.
Just so that I'm clear, life as usual
As far
with
as business in the
neighborhood,
neighborhood
or
is concerned, I'm talking about our neighborhood.
do you
Like,
have a country to the north and a country to the west in mind as well? Or
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
okay. No,
Not
I just wanted to be clear.
I'm being very specific.
Okay.
Can we sit with China or Pakistan and have a conversation
Sure.
to resolve
Sure.
what seem like intractable issues right now?
Okay. No, because I wasn't sure whether you had Sri Lanka and Bangladesh or China and Pakistan. I was just checking.
Sir, my question is very specifically about China. And I know that we're competing at a geopolitical level and we have some disputes with them. But at the same time, from an economic point of view, we can't completely ignore them for many obvious reasons. And in my particular industry, which is the energy and mobility industry, electric vehicles you mentioned in your speech as well, 80% of the vehicles being produced today are in China. 80% of the raw materials being processed are being processed in China. And most of the technology, regardless of where they're building a battery factory anywhere in the world, the equipment is coming from China, whether it's US or Europe or anywhere. So in that type of situation, how do you balance these two priorities? One is, the challenge that you're having on a geopolitical level, but at the same time, ease of doing business, even Atmanirbhar is required. If we have to achieve that, China is required in that process.
On regionalizing the neighborhood, uh, you know, actually, if one looks at especially the last 10 years, there's been a great improvement in regional connectivity and regional interdependence. If I for the moment look at the other countries I spoke about, if you look at Bangladesh, Nepal, uh, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, uh, uh, definitely Bangladesh, Nepal, you can see today there are road connections, there are rail connections, there are power grids, there are fuel pipelines, which didn't exist before. I mean, if you are to traverse the border, it is so much easier. The volume of business which is being done is more. Our access to ports, which is something we've never had on a national basis in Bangladesh, is actually something very big. A lot of these have great consequences for our eastern states and our northeastern states. So I would say, if I were to look at structurally, with many of with Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, things have actually gone well for us. Politics has gone steadily in Bangladesh, been a bit more erratic in Nepal, been very steady in Bhutan. That's the scenario there. In the case of Sri Lanka, we have three big proposals on the table that we are working on. One is a land bridge to Sri Lanka, one is a power grid to Sri Lanka, and the third is a fuel pipeline to Sri Lanka. We believe all three are doable. We think this will help both countries. It will certainly give Sri Lanka access to a lot of uh, Indian, products and services on scale. People saw, for example, after the Ukraine conflict, that when they source fuel out of India, it was significantly cheaper than negotiating it yourself. In fact, very often they couldn't negotiate supplies at all. So that is more doing well. I think with Maldives, our development projects are doing well. We definitely had some political turbulence. We are hopeful about managing it. I think things are a little bit more constructive after my counterpart came over. So that brings us to the two questions, to other neighbors, because then the China, I can, Jaidev, lead to your question as well. Where Pakistan is concerned, uh, look, 2 points here. One, we have struggled continuously with the fact that they have unrelentingly practiced terrorism, cross border terrorism. So, this attitude in our country earlier, that we put up with terrorism as a eccentricity of a neighbor, that's the way they are and we have to live with it. I think the people of this country made a very clear decision in 2014 that they're not going to accept it. So, in this country, I think the tolerance for any kind of cross border terrorism activity is very low. It is very clear that there will be consequences both across the LOC and across the IB if something like this happens. That is really the message of Uri and Balakot. Now, the ball is in their court. If they wind down, this industry which they have built up over many, many decades, uh, then people will treat them like a normal neighbor. If they make this their core competence, then obviously that will define their uh, image. So we have been very straight with them that they have to make up their mind. They have to make up their mind, and part of the problem is also that after 2019 the then Imran Khan government took a number of steps which actually downgraded the relationship. We didn't do it, they did it. So, where Pakistan is concerned, I think our messaging has been very clear to them. And we have to see, they've also just had their election. We have to wait and see, what do the people who've now come into power, what do they decide? Where China is concerned, I think it's more complex. There are, I would say, at least three aspects to it. One, the fundamental aspect that if peace and tranquility in the border areas is disturbed, you know, would you do business with somebody who's just barged onto your drawing room and is, trying to make a mess of your house fencing? You won't. There's a common sense proposition there. I mean, if a country has gone back on written agreements and is doing something on our borders, how can we then say that the business world will continue as normal and other things won't? So that's one complication. That doesn't, by the way, mean business stops, because the numbers show you business has not stopped. So you use the word we cannot ignore. Business in this country has not ignored China. In fact, business is buying from China. So I think we need to define the problem. The problem is, do we take precautions today? Do we actually identify a list of businesses, some more sensitive than others, and assess what the possibilities are there? The second issue for us, built up over the last 20 years, is actually the trade imbalance issue. And here we have, frankly, a problem with the business community of India, which is that business still is making choices based, really, it's a very, I would say, a price point choice which people make. I understand the compulsions of business, but in the long run, we will have to see how we encourage business to do much more domestic sourcing. And obviously, for that, we need to see much more domestic production. Now, we know, I mean, if I come to you today and say, don't buy China, buy everything in India, you'll say that, well, I can't buy. There are no vendors, there's no supply of that. So I'll have to do the chicken and egg at the same time. I'll have to encourage production in India while encouraging businesses to source in India. So we'll have to move that. It's long, painful, because we are actually making up for 20, 30 years of neglect of manufacturing. The third issue, because you mentioned a particular industry, I think in many uh, countries today, we have to put a national security filter. A national security filter doesn't mean nothing comes, but a national security filter definitely means that in a business proposition, we have to evaluate certain national security sensitivities which may be there. So, where China is concerned, you know, we will still encourage people in this country manufacture in India, source in India, procure from India, wherever possible. Try to think a little bit more medium term, long term than you can. But we have not completely and utterly prohibited people working with China. But frankly, we would much rather you work with Indian companies if there is an Indian option available to you. I, that I think is good for our national security. We hope you think that it is good for your own business in the long term.